For the consideration of gender inclusivity, I'm going to be using Latinx a lot in the presentation, so just keep that in mind. If you have any questions regarding the term, I know it's been like a debate in the community, stick around for whenever the questions. So I want to start off with the quote real quick. So it says, your individuality is important, but so is belonging. Recognize the parts of your culture that shape your past and parts you want to carry into your future. So in like every culture, there's its pros and there's taboos, and taboos aren't all carried into like where you want to be in the future. So this quote's kind of important, at least to me and maybe people in my culture, because there's parts of it we want to like acknowledge, but also educate people with. So I'm going to be covering two topics today. We're going to be covering the understanding of numerous cultures, the issues the community face in pop culture, the stereotypes portrayed in pop culture, positive representation showcase, which is my favorite part. Final thoughts on it, and then I'm going to open up for questions at the end. So first and foremost, with understanding the numerous cultures, one of the big things popular culture does a lot is the fact that they think anybody who identifies as Latinx comes from Mexico. That's not always the case. A lot of cultures have not been portrayed in popular media, and within like the community itself, there's also like subcultures like Afro-Latino or like mixed race between people. So it's really important that those are also showcased. Latinx and Hispanic are not the same thing. Hispanic, signifies that you come from a Spanish-speaking country such as Spain, and Spain, at least in history, is known as a colonizer country. So that's why Latinx became a thing. And with Latinx, it also includes like Brazil, and in Brazil, they don't speak Spanish. Different cultures lead to different experiences, which in turn create different stories. So within every culture, everything's different. So it's important that they're showcased because again, not every culture is shown off or showcased, and different cultures mean people have different experiences growing up. So not everybody had the same experience growing up. I know I didn't with other people, and when I meet somebody that looked like me, I'd ask them like, "Oh, are you also Mexican?" And they get offended because it's like, "Oh, you're not. Okay, I didn't know other people outside of the same community existed." So it's really cool when I get to meet other people that say, "Oh, I also had this growing up, but it was different the way we did it," which led to different stories being told within other people. So here's a couple of issues the community faces in pop culture. Oxford Dictionary identifies colorism as prejudice or discrimination against individuals with dark skin, typically among people of the same ethnic or racial group. Again, Afro-Latinos in the community aren't really heavily showcased, so it's really important that they are acknowledged and they're shown off in popular culture because we don't ever get to see it a whole lot. Because a lot of times the models and actors we see are usually fairer skin, or like they're portrayed with like European features. Miscasting, again, that kind of goes with colorism, where they'll have someone who looks the part but isn't exactly from that culture. I know one of the best examples I can give, maybe worse if you're thinking about it. On my block, casted a girl who looked brown, but she was actually white, and it turns out she was not of the culture either, and that got hit with a lot of backlash.
You know what character that was?
Yeah, it wasn't on my block. I forgot her name, but she would her parents got deported.
Oh, the one that got shot?
Yep.
Oh, your cousin.
Yep.
Or how like J-Lo was cast as Selena.
Mhm.
She was Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Mexican.
Authentic stories are not always told. Again, this is kind of like the whitewashing in culture where a lot of stories are kind of told through Hollywood lenses because they think, okay, we can show off the nice parts because nobody wants to see the bad parts. It's like, it's not just bad parts we want to show off, it's the fact that there are aspects of the culture that need to be told that aren't exactly showcased. Culture erasure and culture appropriation is a whole conversation I can get into. To kind of get it in the time, it's in a dictionary quote here, quick. It's basically that you're using aspects and parts of the culture, whether it be practices or clothing, and misinterpreting them, or even using them to exploit it, and not acknowledging the original creators of that culture. I know one of the biggest examples, like I love Rihanna, don't get me wrong, but she dressed up as a chola. Chola is like they acted their own street style culture, and Rihanna did that for I think a video with somebody, and people didn't like it. And then misrepresentation in popular media, again, that can be like where they don't acknowledge the proper culture, where it's again whitewashed or even like whitebrushed, which basically is like they don't showcase it in a good way. So the stereotypes portrayed in pop culture, I have a couple up here, but feel free to shout some out if you can remember them. For the spicy exotic, it's kind of that spicy Latina. I think the biggest example I can think of is Sofia Vergara's character in Modern Family, where it's like she's a sex pot, you know, or like uses her spicy Latina-ness to like kind of get what she wants. And that's nothing really new that's been showcased, but again, it's something that needs to be acknowledged and educated upon. The foreign exchange student is a stereotype mostly paid for laughs, where it's someone who like can't speak Spanish, so they have somebody translate for them, and oftentimes they don't translate it very well. And then when they do learn English, it's very broken, and then they don't showcase that very well. The gangster, like the typical stereotypical thug you see like in LA, los cholos that are like betrayed. And it's harmful for the community because maybe it's something, if everybody sees that's what those types of people are, then eventually they're gonna just categorize that within the community. The servant, so for the male, the servant is like the gardener you see like in movies, or like for the female, it's like the maid. And again, those get played out way too much, heavily showcased, and again, that kind of just singles out the community into like one type of like career choice. And then the mystic kind of goes more within like the indigenous culture, which again also isn't very acknowledged, not even within our own community. And it's kind of more like, okay, the mystic, you know, they know magic, they know like all like the spiritual tribal stuff, which isn't really good. So a quick question, what can we learn from these stereotypes moving forward?
Whoever we know the stereotypes, we can acknowledge that that's not the only way of looking at people.
I think that's the big thing, is that, you know, if they just see the Latino community as those stereotypes, then, you know, that's all they're gonna see, which is not always the case. You know, one of the best things I can think of, like one of my favorite examples is in Black Panther, we finally saw like a lead character that wasn't portrayed like as a thug or like, you know, like a violent criminal. Instead it was someone who was like successful and someone portrayed like as a hero versus, yeah, all the negative we see. I don't know how many people are gonna come in, but for this next part, I'm gonna show off a couple of characters within popular media. If you see somebody you know up there, feel free to just start clapping and start cheering. I'll just spend a couple seconds on them and then I'll go to the next one.
Cisco and Bone, I know that.
Yes,
Jane the
Jane the
Virgin.
Virgin.
And my mom.
Alright, my final thoughts. I kind of brushed over it, so I was expecting a bigger crowd, but again, thank you all you three for coming in.
Yeah.
My final thoughts, again, it's not cool that everyone in the community is just shown off, like, again, in a box, where it's like, okay, here's what they are in the film, so maybe we have to assume that's what they are in real life, you know, and since we see that a lot, especially like in the mid-2000s up to now, I'd like to think we made more progress up to this point. There's still a couple out there, but I think we've moved like well beyond just being portrayed as stereotypes. For sure, if you want to know authentic stories, I say just listen. That's the biggest thing I can tell anybody, where it's like, okay, how do I tell an authentic story? Just listen to what people have to say. And then I'll close it out with one more quote. Acknowledge and embrace the person you are, imperfections and all. That's the highest service we can achieve. To give back
and give to ourselves in the best way we know how.
And that's from Dr. Paul Rodriguez from the University of Dallas, Texas. And I'll open up to some questions.
I don't have questions, but I do feel that stereotypical stuff is Mexican too. A lot of people assume that I know Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not fluent, I'm working on it.
And that's the other thing is that a lot of people, because they assume like, okay, you come from the Latinx community, it's like automatically you're labeled as, oh, you know Spanish, right? So, and I've had a couple experiences too where it's like, I've acknowledged somebody in Spanish and because they were speaking Spanish with somebody, but they didn't actually know it. So I thought, oh shoot, okay, I can't just keep doing that because otherwise, you know, it's putting everybody in a box again.
Yeah. So you said with the Cholo thing, like I hear people get, you know, when they meet like Mexican or Latino people in real life, that turns into a joke.
Yeah.
Oh, you didn't go around this thing, or
Mhm.
about Mexicans being lazy and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
And you know, I know that the accents is another thing that's really played for laughs, where it's like, oh, the Cholo accent is like super portrayed in like media, and it's not always showcased in a good way. So
Do you know there's a big sect in Japan that has like a big Cholo?
I have, yeah, I actually saw that, and I think you were the one who told me about it because we were doing a research project on it, on like different aspects of like, the culture, and this is part of it. Where yeah, they have their own thing over there going on. I thought it was different, but I don't know enough about it to know if it's like how do I call it, appropriation.
Right. That's what she thinks that is more. They were using like the Guadalupe and everything, but they weren't religious.
Oh, I haven't seen that. I just saw them with the outfits on. No, I haven't seen that. Okay.
Yeah. But she had it like hanging up in her car.
Really? Okay. That's news to me.
Yeah.
Okay, now I gotta look into that.
So I just don't keep
That's the other thing. So, yeah, cultural appropriation. It's just it's not just white people. Yeah, it's other people like in other cultures.
Yeah.
I have a kind of a question.
Sure.
So you know, like a lot of like stereotypes and stuff that people have come from like lack of experience and like seeing people like a certain way
Yeah.
versus actually like putting themselves in the community. Do you feel like it's your job to like educate people though? Because like I always struggle with like I want people to see me a certain way, but at the same time I'm like, how is it my job to have to, you know, be the person to educate them?
Yeah. I mean, in my personal experience, I always think it's a good idea to educate somebody. I always give the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, they're probably just educated versus, okay, they're probably just ignorant. Because, and then it gives me an opportunity to educate them, you know? And that's a really good question. I've had that happen and had that asked because, you know, other people don't typically see those experiences, so they assume they don't happen. You know, if you tell somebody these things do happen, then it gives them like better insight that, okay, maybe there are people out there and experiences that aren't showcased that I should probably be more aware of.
It is nice that like in the media and like in like popular culture you are seeing more of like Miles Morales, you know, he's Afro like too.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like I feel like I don't even really remember the time where I was like so well.
And you know that's why it was such a big deal too, because we don't really see a whole lot of it portrayed in media. It's mostly like white Latinos, you know, or fair skinned Latinos, because that's the demand for beauty. I guess that's the standard of beauty, and that's not always the case because it's not always like that everywhere. So, one of the other characters is a doctor, you know, and she's darker skinned Puerto Rican, and that's another like culture and aspect we don't really see portrayed a lot. Like, okay, successful people of a darker skin tone can also be higher ups, you know.
And a woman.
And a woman, exactly, yeah.
Instead of being a nurse, it's actually
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, like more than just Mexican that they were, like I said, Disney was doing like a Colombian
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
show now, and not just all from Mexico.
Yeah.
Nice to see that it's labeled different.
I think Netflix just put on like a musical theme too. I think also like from Brazil. I want to say.
Yeah, those kind of cool. Then I didn't know Brazil was considered Latinx.
Yeah.
I think Portuguese. I guess it makes sense when you think about it, like it's.
Yeah. That's why it's like not really acknowledged, and you know, that's why it's kind of important that people know.
Yeah, put it up there.
Any shots at all in the presentation?
That was a really good presentation.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of it pretty well.
Thank Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like, yeah, a whole lot of people don't really like, again, see it, and it's like, the movies that are portrayed are just like, okay, here's a gangster, he's going to school, and then probably like a shootout or something happens, you know?
Cartels.
Exactly, yeah. It's like, you know, there's people who just like live in that community, aren't necessarily like part of the negative aspects of that community, which our stories aren't showcased very well. I think the best, again, on my block, probably the best portrayal, and the reason I think it was such a big deal for me and other people like in my school is because we don't see a lot of shows where it's like, okay, people of color are leading it, and it's like not in a negative way. You know, it's like they're actually just regular kids growing up in high school. So.
One teacher trying to save the whole school.
Yeah. And the fact that like a lot of the cast is people of color.
Yeah.
They
And
don't really see that. Huh?
That's except for the one.
Yeah. Well, you don't really see that, like, I don't know, even like Black Panther and stuff. That was like, it was one of the first movies that had almost a full black cast.
Man, the Spider-Verse is just good. Well, it was an awesome movie for starters, but like again, we don't see like Afro-Latinos portrayed in movies like a whole lot. So, I think Monse and On My Block, she also is Afro-Latina. The actress herself, I know isn't, but she acknowledged that, and in the show they portray her as Afro-Latina. So that was kind of cool.
I was gonna say something, I forgot.
You guys enjoying the con so far?
You know what?
Are you guys enjoying the con?
Yeah, we were here yesterday too.
Nice.
You been able to like walk around and stuff too?
Yeah, they scheduled me here at 2, and the costume contest is also at 2. So yeah, the costume contest.
Oh.
Yeah, I wanted to go do that and watch it, but I ended up just sticking around here.
This is your presentation.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how many people were gonna show up. It was like 15 minutes, and then you 3 showed up. So I'm like, okay, well, I'll stick around. Give them something.
Well, it's not like Latino culture, so like, let's check it out.
Yeah, because again, I don't see a whole lot of like people like that are Latino in popular culture, and when we do, it's usually a side character, and sadly enough, it's like, okay, we'll take it. You know, it's like, okay, we can also be leads. You know.
Yeah. Or like you said, they're more fair skinned, like the straight black hair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I know, and then Brooklyn Nine-Nine is another show of mine, and one of my favorites because I think one of the cool things, you get 2 Latino officers in the show. The crazy thing was when the 2 leads, when they got casted, they thought they were joking or one of them was gonna get fired because they had 2 leads in there. Because you don't see that on TV, you know? So it's pretty cool. I know the one thing I kind of skimmed over with like emphasis on like the importance of untold stories is like how Latinos and Latinas in the community don't really portray people in the LGBT community, because not even like our own community accepts that because it's kind of a taboo. So it was really nice to see like Rosa, you know, because she came out as bi.
Yeah.
We don't ever really see that, or even like in what was it in Jane the Virgin, you know, they had LGBT relationship on that show too.
Sure. The new people.
Oh, Charm has it too.
Yeah, the new people.
I haven't seen the new one.
It's like the new it's
Yeah,
all
but it's all together.
I didn't know that. Okay, that's cool. The more you know. I know. I think Renee Montoya. Have you guys seen Birds of Prey?
Yes.
You know, Renee is Dominican, and she's actually, I think, also lesbian in the comics. So one of the first openly gay, she's a detective, again, Latina in the police community, in the LGBT community, and for the Latinx community. You know, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's been a lot, like growing up. I know I made the joke that Rosario Dawson's like the unofficial Latinx auntie because she's like in everything we watched growing up. I think she's playing Ahsoka now.
I can hit it.
I don't know what it is. I don't really think it is a mic, but it should be fine. Well, any more thoughts, any more questions, and we can all just hang out and keep talking.
Yeah.
Another kind of thing is, I was like, so I'm like a huge Disney fan too, like especially like Disney princess and stuff, you know, like whatever. And I realized it's not like, there's like really yet to be a Latina Disney princess. Like the closest is the Elena of Avatar, And I guess I can show it. So technically she's not considered a Disney princess because she has more like her own show.
Yeah.
Like, that's kind of crazy too, because they're, like, you didn't really realize that, you know?
And she's like from a fictional part of Spain.
Yeah.
And you can say, okay, yeah, Hispanic, that's fine, but like that's like more of like colonizer,
Yeah,
you know,
that's true.
type of stuff. And it's not even like a real country. The closest we get, I mean, like I said, it's kind of sad to think about, but oftentimes, you know, it's like you see a minority be portrayed in media, it's like their side character, like you said, she doesn't have her own show. It's like we'll just take it because it's like the best we get at this point. It is kind of nice seeing more like lead characters coming on because it's like, okay, this is actually cool because now I can see somebody I can relate to.
One thing I found recently was a lot of the Disney movies that had good stories. They were only leads for a little bit till they turned into an animal.
Princess and the Frog.
Princess
Yeah.
and the Frog, like 11 minutes, she was on screen, Frog, and then Brother Bear, he was on screen 22 minutes. And
Oh yeah, that's
Bear.
true. Yeah.
There was another thing, Emperor's New Groove, who was like a person for 19 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
then turned into a llama. So, kind of cut their screen time down.
Yeah, wow, I didn't think about that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like, okay, I knew about Princess and the Frog, and I got to think like, oh yeah, Brother Bear, that's true. Yeah.
And then she asked me to go with any white characters that turned into animals in these movies.
Mm-mm.
I was like, I couldn't think of any.
At least maybe not cartoons. I know Disney
They'll
Channel.
turn more human.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
Yeah, if you ever turn an animal, they'll turn into like a white human too.
Yeah.
So there's that. It's funny. I think like the one movie that kind of, I don't want to say like does like it covers everything because there's a whole lot you can go, but it covers race is Zootopia because it's like they handle taboos in a kids movie,
Yeah.
and it's like okay, if this movie can do it, I'm pretty sure like if you're like well educated enough, other people can do it to like to their kids, you know, because it is an uncomfortable conversation. I mean, growing up, like I'm pretty sure I can't speak for everybody, but in my experience, like you know, parents have had to talk to their kids about that growing up, and it's like okay, I mean that's our version of the talk, and it's not like birds and bees. It's more like okay, here's how things are, and here's how things might work out. So
How people are going to perceive it.
yeah, exactly, yeah.
And one time my mom got mistaken as a towel lady when we were swimming when we were kids at a hotel. And my mom like had to explain to me why they thought she was a towel lady.
Yeah, damn. See, that's messed up.
And I was like 6. I was like,
Or like have to go like into heavy-handed, but like kind of like how they tell you to like act when you get like pulled over. You know, like that was always scary to think about as a kid. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I literally had that power. My dad had that power with me when I was like 14 maybe, before I knew my lessons. Even so, every time.
Yep. That was the same way with us too. It was scary to think about because I'm like, no kid should have to think like that, but
Yeah.
it is like as it is. That's kind of how it is, you know. But that's why it's important to have like conversations of like awareness, you know. And it's like okay, there's people that exist in America that don't grow up the same way as like white people do. So
well, like you said, too, the representation. Not everybody then will see what's a thug.
exactly, yeah. We're not all dangerous. We're also just regular people.
Yeah, because like we said too, like it's a good idea to have like the the minority right be a hero. Because obviously it's for the person who can see themselves as the hero,
Mhm.
but then it lets other people see that that person can be a hero.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not
Yeah.
always the way people are for
That was, I don't know if you guys ever saw the Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Mhm.
Is like the fact that the Falcon is going to become the next Captain America. He really talked about like, it's like you want me to be, as a black man, you want me to be Captain America.
Mhm.
Like, that was pretty interesting too. With the fact that they actually like acknowledged it.
Mhm.
Yeah, like, because I mean, it's some people be black people. So it's nice that they acknowledge it.
Oh yeah, the new area movies with the black woman.
Yes, and we have
I know when you're in Falcon, Winter Soldier and Falcon, I mixed it up. Do you remember like there's a scene where he goes to talk to the first Captain America, and then right after like the cops show up and like they kind of start acting up on him. I'm like, oh man, they're actually doing that. I'm like, in a way, like I'm like, oh, they're like portraying police the way like I just sound like I'm a hater, but like the way they actually are, you know. But I mean, you don't see that a lot in our media. So it's like, okay, they're actually doing stuff. It might not be like for the greater good, but it's like, okay, that's kind of how it is, you know? And then they kind of lay it off because it's like, oh, you're a superhero, so that means it's okay. And it's I'm like, that's messed up. I'm like, huh.
There was a scene like that, I don't know if you guys watch movies, but
I haven't seen that one. No.
there's a scene there's like a middle deal, I don't know what it is. It's like, he's like a big black guy, you know, like with the shaved head, like, it's very intimidating, I think. And there was, like, he had like an interaction with the cops too, and then it was suddenly when his white partner came out, he's like, he showed his back, he said, they're good, and the cops immediately, you know, like, shut down. I was like,
Even in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, you know, when Terry, like, he goes outside because like his daughter under the blanket, and like a cop walks over to him and like starts profiling him, like in his own neighborhood. And I was like,
Or when he was jogging.
yeah.
So it is nice that like you see like, you know, like some people like, just pretend like that doesn't happen.
Mhm.
They just ignore it. They're like, oh yeah, that happens, but maybe once in a while. That's not the
It's all
typical. Yeah.
And
yeah,
the thing is that the times it does happen, it's not that, oh, it's only happening once in a while. It's like, no, it's happening because it got recorded. Imagine how many times like things have happened and haven't been recorded, you
Or
know?
recordings get taken away. Or,
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Yeah, like I said, I kind of wish they would portray like Mexico City, because I've seen some podcasts and stuff where people go to the city and they're like, oh wow, this is kind of just like America, like it's just, it's all modernized and stuff, but they're so used to seeing the gritty with the cartel and the like poverty neighborhoods and stuff.
Or like the contrast that like even just like the nice resorts and like the beaches, you know, it's
Yeah.
like, there's other like what's called haciendas, you know, it's just like little neighborhoods and little areas that are just like part of the community. It's not just like I said, all drugs or like all paradise in some places.
Right. The same here, like there's some neighborhoods in America that are like scary and whatever with the drugs and stuff.
Yeah.
They're run by gangs, but.
We got suburbs too, and it's like yeah, people just are living here. We don't just have like I know one of the things I heard, there's this guy, he's a comedian, he's like, just because people are from the hood doesn't mean everybody's like from the hood. You know, it's like there's people who just live there, regular people.
Yeah, for sure. But I don't know if gentrification stuff is like a whole other thing.
Yeah.
Trying to make the neighborhood more, or whatever, hippie.
Gentrifying it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I think right now, like Midway, like they're trying to like update it as much as they can, but like they're trying to make everything super expensive now. So it's just like, no.
Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Pull the people and then have them money. Yeah, I think like kind of going back to like the whole what part of what was even like where we are today versus 20 years ago. You know? Things that were happening.
I think the thing, like the one thing I didn't really like is how when they casted somebody that looked of the descent, it's like they just gave him like an exotic last name, like Gonzalez or like Lopez or something. It's like, and they're like a buddy cop or something, you know? It's like, oh, it's my sidekick, you know, officer so and so. It's like, oh, okay, but it's like a white guy, you know?
Right.
It has like black hair or something. It's like that's the best you're gonna get on TV. Yeah. Now we got badasses like Amy Santiago and Rosa Diaz. So.
They're not, like you said, the stereotype, just not like a hothead Latino.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I like that they actually acknowledge their identity too, instead of just like saying like, oh yeah, here's two leading ladies, okay, go do whatever, you know, it's like, okay, I'm, for Rosa's case, you know, it's like she's bi, Latina, and she acknowledges that, you know, she tells the 9-9 when she comes out, and she kind of trusts everybody, so that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. Like I like that they get to talk about their culture, like what's accepted there, usually what's not.
Yeah.
A lot of men are macho, they can't cry.
Oh my god, that's another thing too, yeah, like how masculinity is portrayed, oh, don't even get me started, like, guys have to be like, okay, you can't cry, you can't do this, you can't show emotion, but if you do, then you're a weakling. It's like, okay, guys are guys too, but like, they also have feelings, not everybody's gonna be macho, so.
I feel like there's so much like more with like people like men of color, especially. I know a lot.
Yeah, for sure. There's this guy, I don't remember like what his name was, but he basically says like, especially like in sports, like boxers, you know, it's like they're seen as like gladiators. So, you know, gladiators back in the day were like meant to like entertain people. So they couldn't really show emotion because like they were a part of the game. And because if they showed emotion at all, then they're out of it and then they're not like in the game. If that makes any sense. Because then if they show emotion, then they can't be seen as like strong or they can't be seen as macho, you know. So yeah, exactly. Hi there.
Hi.
I had a presentation on earlier. I was just opening up for questions. I can go through it one more time if y'all want to see it.
Okay, you guys are having an open discussion. You were able to listen in.
Yeah, absolutely. absolutely. We were talking about representation of Latino culture, or Latinx culture, excuse me, in popular culture. And I covered a couple things, how right now we're talking about like how, especially men of color, aren't really portrayed to show emotion. Because, you know, growing up, guys are told, okay, you can't cry, you can't show emotion because you're considered weak, you know? And it's a lot more like conflicted for the people of color because that's not something you see as common, especially on TV, you know, or movies. Care to share your thoughts on anything? I had a showcase earlier on some characters that were portrayed in media because, again, we don't really see a whole lot of leads. Most of the time, we just get side characters, like we'll even see like just an acknowledgement, and it's like, okay, we'll take what we can get. So I was showing off characters earlier. I can go through it one more time if you want to see it.
Let's do it, yeah.
All right.
Thank you. You have the time.
Absolutely.
You have the echo from the ball,
I don't. Should I just go through the showcase, or do you guys want to take the whole presentation over?
I'm gonna ask them. That's the only question I got. Sorry, start it over for him.
Oh, yeah, sure. All right.
Thank you for the conversation, though.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
Can you guys hear me without the microphone? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Let me hit that real quick.
Hey, Banana, come on up.
I'm sorry, I'm just taking a quick nap.
Do you want me to film again or do you want me to cut it?
Is it?
Do you want me to film it again or cut it?
Yeah, you want to start over?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for accommodating for everywhere.
Huge shout out to Twin Cities Con, first con I went to, so that's pretty cool.
All right, yeah.
So I'm going to be covering the representation of Latinx culture, pop culture. So Latinx is actually a term that's been a bit of a debacle lately within the Latino community. If you want to have any questions about it, I recommend sticking around for the questionnaire when I put it back up. So I'll start off with a quote that says, "Your individuality is important, but so is belonging. Recognize the parts of your culture that have shaped your past and the parts you want to carry with you into your future." The reason that quote resonates with me so much is because I know there's like taboos like in my own culture. You know, like I was acknowledging earlier, like the masculinity thing, you know. So I don't have to carry that with me. I don't want to. You know, I just want to acknowledge like the good parts of my culture, and that can go for anybody too. You know, it's like just take the good things you want, carry them with you. I'm going to be covering a few topics. I was covering these earlier. Like in the showcase, I'm going to present at last, and then I'll share my thoughts, and then I can open up for questions at the end. So I was telling them earlier that one of the biggest things in popular media is that whenever someone identifies as Latinx in the media, like in movies or TV shows, everyone automatically assumes they come from Mexico. That's not always the case. You know, a lot of sub-communities like the Afro-Latino community or mixed community, they're in that culture too, so and they don't get acknowledged as much. Latinx and Hispanic are two completely different things. So Hispanic means it comes from a Spanish-speaking country, mostly Spain, and Latinx can mean different countries, mostly showcased up here. And that includes Brazil. Brazil does not speak Spanish, they actually speak Portuguese over there. So different cultures lead to different experiences, which in turn create different stories. So not every Latinx culture is the same. They might have a few aspects that might be similar, but they're not always the same. I know within like the week of September 16th through the 15th and 16th, excuse me, there's a huge surge of Independence Days within those weeks, but they're not always celebrated the same way. Those in turn create different experiences, so which means not everyone celebrates the same way, which leads to different stories, you know, because I did things one way in my culture, someone else might do it a different way in their culture. So some of the issues the community faces in pop culture include colorism, miscasting, authentic stories are not always told, culture erasure and cultural appropriation, and misrepresentation in popular media. So what colorism is when someone within the ethnic community, usually darker skin tone, is not acknowledged within their community or often not welcome. And because of that, their stories aren't always told. And you know, some characters, like Miles Morales, for example, or Monse from My Black, they're of Afro-Latino descent. And because they get to have that showcase, in the past, other characters were not able to, because our own culture didn't want to acknowledge them either. Miscasting, so there have been times, I was telling them earlier, that in the past, there have been people who have been casted with like an exotic sounding last name that were not people of color. And because of that, they're not always cast into like a good role and usually portrayed as someone who is of that exotic background. Authentic stories are not always told. As I said earlier, a lot of Hollywood has mostly like washed over like Latinx history, and because of that, most of the stories told are either okay, hero's journey, where at the end there's a resolution for it, versus okay, here's a problem, we're gonna acknowledge that problem, and we're gonna deal with that problem, but in an authentic way, versus okay, point A, point B. Cultural erasure and appropriation. So again, it's kind of where they watch and gloss over the fact that there's a rich culture within those communities. They don't want to acknowledge that because they think, okay, nobody wants to see that, or okay, we're gonna gloss over it because we don't have enough time or something, you know. And you know, we don't ever get to see the representation people want to see. And for appropriation, what cultural appropriation signifies is that people from a different culture will take aspects such as practices or clothing of a different culture and then misrepresent it in a negative way. Which, again, misrepresenting in popular media, that kind of goes hand in hand with cultural erasure and appropriation, and it's a good transition to it because then it leads to stereotyping, which I will cover next. Here are some of the stereotypes portrayed in popular culture, which I'll cover each of them. So for the spicy exotic, the best example I can think of is Sofia Vergara's character from, what's that one show she's in? Modern Family, yeah. It's like, she's supposed to be like loudmouth and like, you know, super hot-blooded and a sex pot, and that's not always portrayed in a good way because it's like, okay, someone from another culture is considered exotic, and exotic kind of fetishizes the culture versus actually appreciating it. The foreign exchange student, so what that is basically someone from another country, let's say a Latinx country, will come into a school or a school setting and they can't speak English. Or if they can speak English, it's broken English, and that's mostly paid for laughs instead of acknowledgement that, okay, this guy comes from another country, let's understand his culture. It's more like, okay, let's exploit him and have him do our dirty work for us or something. The gangster. So the gangster is typically portrayed as like the thug, the drug dealer, the troublemaker who basically wants to like show off how macho he is, and that's not always a good portrayal of like male people of color. The servant. So for guys, for the male role, the servant is typically portrayed as a gardener in movies. For the female, it's typically portrayed as the maid, and those roles have been done to death, if you ask me, because you see those roles all the time. Eventually people start to think, okay, if that's all I see in the media, that's all I'm gonna interpret these group of people as. And then the mystic. The mystic kind of goes in hand with the indigenous culture of the community, and those cultures are like rarely told. So when they are portrayed, it's mostly portrayed as a negative stereotype, which is not really good. It's mostly like, okay, someone can do something like spiritually, and then they know everything, which again, not very nice. So I'm gonna open up this question. What can we learn from stereotypes moving forward?
Oh, it's interactive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about what the question means, like what can we learn, maybe like learn to improve from like the past and current depiction of stereotypes?
Yeah.
That's an interesting question.
I think there should be a balance because everybody can be exaggerated.
Mhm.
Like, I come from a circus background, so for me, like, I love cartoons and that's all good, but I think like the Native American those stories should be told authentically
Mhm.
from the people
Yeah.
rather than rewrites from somebody else that isn't even that culture.
Yeah.
So I think they should have there's a lot of actors in New Mexico that are Native American, and they should be able to pull real stories from real people
Yeah.
and not have somebody rewrite it that's not them.
Mhm.
So that would make it authentic.
And that, you know, that kind of goes hand in hand where it's like Hollywood often wouldn't tell authentic stories because they don't hire, like we said, the authentic
Right.
people to write those stories.
Right. And if they want to exaggerate something, that would be more exciting because then we would see funny exaggeration from their eyes rather than making everything similar.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So earlier, moving forward from stereotypes, I'm gonna go into what I call a positive representation in media. And this ranges from comic books to movies to television shows, and I have this interactive. So I'm gonna showcase characters for a couple seconds. If you see someone up there you recognize, just start cheering or clapping like as loud as you can.
Wow, Morales.
Alright, there we go. If you're familiar with Birds of Prey, that's Renee Montoya down there in the bottom left.
Yay, America forever.
I could do a whole presentation on just her because her influence in popular media is like beyond the
Oh,
charts.
really? Melissa Villasenor. What was it, Diaz? Oh, Amy Santiago. Characters.
Melissa actually kind of made history because she was the first Mexican woman to be casted on Saturday Night Live. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. Roma. I love Roma.
I love Roma. That was very, very authentic.
And again, it's
The
really-
cinematography
yeah,
was the greatest.
It was super important in the Latinx community because the lead is of indigenous culture in Mexico, and we don't ever didn't see that. So having her be the lead,
It
yeah.
was so, that was my favorite movie that year that came out.